Welcome, welcome to day 2 of our turboTHPO Toolkit workshop. This is part of our ongoing series, new that we've created this year to help baby THPOs get up and running and also provide extra information for any other skill level, experience level along the way. So thank you for joining us today. I recognize some of you from yesterday. Thanks for coming back. And for those of you who missed it, thank you for joining us today. And you can see in the chat box that we are recording these sessions. And by next week, we will download them from Zoom and post them to our YouTube page. So I will send the link to that to registrants, and it will also be posted on our website for later viewing or for a review if there's something you want to go back and watch again. Valerie Grusing, I'm the Executive Director of NATHPO. I've been here for about 2.5 years. The office is based in Washington, D.C., and this is part of my home office in Silver Spring, Maryland, on the north side of the city. It's the ancestral home of the Piscataway and the Nacotchtank peoples. And I myself am descended from colonizers of Central North Carolina, so remain, as always, eternally grateful for the opportunity to do this work. To recap a little bit, yesterday we talked about getting started. So we had 2 former THPOs and great colleagues of mine talk about setting up your office, best practices for infrastructure and handling administrative tasks, and also prioritizing and managing your workload. And if you are an aspiring THPO, you will soon discover that your workload increases by several fold when you get that office up and going. And that's a good thing, but always appreciate some professional tips and tricks on how to make that transition and prioritize the many, many requests that you get and the many hats that THPOs wear. So if you missed it, be sure and go catch the recording. There was some great discussion, great questions in the sessions. And today we're going to talk about the money. First, we're going to have Madeline Kahns, who actually manages the THPO grants at the Park Service, give you the official perspective on that and getting started and extra details. And as always, our sessions, we encourage questions and discussion. So please type your questions in the chat box as we go, or raise your hand, or unmute yourself and just ask. And we will also have plenty of time at the end for questions and discussion. And I might be calling on some of you who I see out there who are experienced with this topic and with this process to offer some perspectives from your experience on the THPO side as well. So heads up. And then we're going to take a 30-minute break and dig into the topic of sourcing other funding for your THPO program in the afternoon. The THPO grant the apportionment amount is decided by a formula that's partly based on land area, and the average amount that each THPO gets is about almost enough for a full staff person. So to successfully and effectively run an office, it's best to get creative and seek alternate sources of funding, as it is for many of us across many sectors. So I'm really looking forward to hearing from both of our presenters today. And I'm going to turn it over to Madeline first. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that you can share yours, go through your presentation. And I also want to encourage folks to introduce yourselves in the chat box. Some of you are doing that so that we can get to know you as we listen.
Hi, everybody. My name is Madeline Kahns, and I've worked with the State Tribal Local Plans and Grants Division in the National Park Service for over 10 years now. I've dealt a lot with the THPO grants. I also handle SHPO grants and some other competitive grant programs. I'm also the lead on the Tribal Heritage Grant Program. Right now, I'm going to introduce Leanne Chapman, who is actually doing most of the grant work. So you will probably interact with her more than me. Leanne, can you unmute your phone and say hello? Or Valerie, can you unmute her?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yep.
Hi, my name's Leanne Chapman. I'm with the National Park Service. I have technically worked with grants for about 4 years, but more specifically, I've been working with the THPO grants within this past year. So I'm fairly new, but I'm really looking forward to working with you. And if you have any questions, I will answer it to my best ability, and I'm looking forward to working with you. So thank you.
Thanks, Leanne. And maybe you can put your contact info in the chat for them.
I will do that.
Okay. I'm going to go through our slide. I'm gonna stop my video for bandwidth because I have a little issue right now, but I'll just start speaking. As Valerie mentioned, it's the Historic Preservation Fund appropriation that your funds come from. So every year Congress passes their annual budget, and it's broken down into 2 lines. One line specifies the amount of the HPF funds and that go to the states and the tribes. And then the second one, to the states, and the second one is to a portion to the tribe. The tribal line is divided, the tribal line also supports the Tribal Heritage Grant Program and the THPO Operations Fund. The Tribal Heritage Grant Program is a small amount, $500,000 or less, and that usually does come from THPO grants that had not been apportioned from the last year, so we don't usually have to take it from this line. Excuse me, and the Tribal Heritage Grant Program, which is what I am the lead for, is open to all federally recognized tribes, not just THPOs, Alaskan and Hawaiian Native groups. And it's a competitive program with mostly project grants, but THPOs are eligible to apply for that as well. The apportionment, the amount awarded to each THPO is calculated by using an apportionment formula, as Valerie mentioned, developed in consultation with the THPOs in 2003. Under this formula, about 81% of the total appropriation is divided equally among the THPOs, and the remaining 19% is based on area of tribal lands as defined in the National Historic Preservation Act. So every year, THPOs are eligible to apply. The amount awarded to each THPO is calculated by using the apportionment. Every THPO is able to apply for the apportioned amounts, but they must do it through grants.gov. It isn't automatically awarded. So you would have to go in and apply for the amount. Once Congress approves the budget, we conduct the apportionment, and then we send a group email to all the, or maybe a bulletin out to all the THPOs giving the amount for each tribe that you are entitled to apply for. And along with that, we send instructions on how to apply through grants.gov. This is typically done after the first of the year, even though Congress is supposed to set the budget in at the end of the fiscal year and the beginning of the fiscal year, October. We don't usually get that until after the first of the year. And then you are able to apply for it. So every year you get a grant. Each grant's period of performance is 2 years. One grant every year, but it's good for 2 years. So your grants are going to overlap. The time usually starts before you actually receive the funds, beginning the previous October. Like I said, it's a fiscal year. So you may not get to apply for the grant until after the first of the year, but you can apply your expenses back through October if your finance office and your tribe allows that, because sometimes you aren't allowed to expend the money until you actually receive it. But that is the period of performance. So it's October for 2 years through till September the next year. Okay. THPOs, like I said, apply through grants.gov. Usually the required application date is April. I'm giving a rough estimate because, again, it depends on when Congress gets the budget completed. The application, it usually requires these things. It's the SF424 series, which is the information on the SF424, your budget, SF424A, and a budget justification where you break down that budget into specifics of time and areas. You also have to submit a work plan, and that is your anticipated activities for the coming year. But like I said, directions and requirements are sent every year. So make sure that your THPO information is correct with the THPO program. Recently, I'm just going to mention it briefly. Recently, we've switched our grant management systems to Grant Solutions. A lot of tribes already in Grant Solutions, so a lot of your finance people are able to use it very easily. However, your grants going to be through that, and your reporting is going to be, notifications are going to be sent through that. But again, we will always give you instructions because they change slightly every year. I might mention too that the work plan, in case you're interested, typically covers the number of properties expected to be added to your inventory, or the number of Section 106 undertakings that you'll be consulted on or be reviewed, proposed preservation, education activities, and maybe any other activities that will be paid for through the federal funds. Your grant agreement has all the requirements listed regarding your grant funding. Please read through it thoroughly. It has requirements on when reporting is due, how you can spend the funds. Certain restrictions are listed there, such as Section 106 requirements, NEPA, the indirect cost rate cap, etc. There are a lot of different things, so please read through it. Every condition is very specific to HPF. Any activity in the work plan that NPS identifies as possibly having an effect on the environment will be reviewed under the National Environmental Policy Act, NEPA. So keep that in mind if you have surveys that you're looking to do. Mention that in your work plan. As I mentioned before, there's grant reporting, and it's required after the first year of the fiscal year. So that's an annual report due at the end of December 31st for the first year of your grant. Then a final report is due the second year, January 30th, for the full 2 years of the grant. It gets confusing. They overlap. We do try to make it simple for you though. So again, one grant every year, but they're good for 2 years. So you have 2 years to expend the funds. But at the end of the first year, you have to send in an annual report. And at the end of the second year, you send in a report that covers both years. I also wanted to mention that the THPO program report is different than the grant requirements. If you get a grant, you have to do the annual report and the closeout report. However, if you don't receive a grant, or you for whatever reason, even though you don't receive a grant, you still have to submit the THPO program accomplishments report. And this is required of your grant MOU. Your agreement to become a THPO requires that you submit a narrative report every year. Again, directions will be sent. Please make sure that if you change THPOs, that NPS be aware of who the new THPO is, and that we receive directions or a letter from your executive appointing a new THPO. Okay, so as this is a federal assistance grant, there are certain limitations on how grant funds are expended. All allowances are listed in 2 CFR 200, which are the federal rules regarding grants that NPS as a federal agency and as you as a recipient must follow. Please be sure to acquaint yourself with these requirements or contact your finance people, as I'm sure they already understand them. And I would suggest that you have a very good relationship with your finance office or the people that handle your financial information, because they will be able to be a good resource for you. In addition to CFR 200, the Historic Preservation Fund Manual contains all the specific program activities that you can apply costs to. Of course, that depends on those areas that you assume from the SHPO. As mentioned before, the grant agreement may have special restrictions on certain costs, so please review every condition in the grant agreement. We'll go over a few sample operating and contracting costs. Again, these will be broken down on your application and your budget. Of course, personnel costs for staffing to perform any of the tasks related to the THPOs, activities, projects, and goals. Elder stipends would go under here because they're not a contractor. They would be considered personnel, or you can list them under other costs. But stipends for advice or services from the elders is an allowable cost. Other things that you might expend money towards would be equipment or supplies needed for THPO projects, surveys, what have you, just office supplies. Travel expenses for THPO programs, meetings and conferences, trainings, and cost to hire a contractor to do something like an archaeological survey or some other type of work. Now these regulations in 2 CFR 200, all these apply only to the money that you are given as a grant. Any other money that the tribe contributes to the THPO program can be used as the tribe deems acceptable and in accordance, as long as it's in accordance with the THPO program agreement. And we'll go over this a little bit on the next slide, which are some common unallowable costs. For example, curation of artifacts after that grant end date, entertainment and alcohol, most food, unless it's you can't easily get it for a meeting, then you might be able to charge it. You can always ask. Honoraria, not allowed. However, as I mentioned, elder stipends are. It's a little different. Lobbying, fundraising, NAGPRA activities. Now this is a big one because a lot of THPOs are tasked in their department to handle NAGPRA. However, the HPF fund does not cover that because that is not a duty that you have assumed from the SHPO. So if it's an NAGPRA activity, you have to make sure that either you're not expending funds or any personnel costs towards those activities. Other unallowable costs are travel expenses beyond federal per diem rates, which should be clear. Equipment purchased without NPS approval. Drones, again, not allowed with HPF funds or used by paid personnel. However, if you have personnel from the tribe side, you may do that as long as it isn't associated with HPF funds. If you have questions about that, you can ask me in a bit. I just thought I would touch briefly on administrative and indirect costs because the HPF, the Historic Preservation Act, specifically does not allow admin and indirect costs be charged against the grant over 25%. So that's together. Administrative costs are usually costs that someone in the finance office might do, maybe, you know, submitting the 425. That would be an administrative cost. However, tribes also lump a lot of that under indirect costs, so it might be included in one of those types of things. But usually administrative costs, they're not just administrative duties within the THPO office, they're specific to finance costs that other people in the firm would probably do for other departments. And as I mentioned, You must, in order to get your indirect cost, you have to have an indirect cost rate agreement, and that is set out in your agreement. But again, only 25% of the total grant budget can be applied to both administrative costs and indirect costs added together. This gets confusing, but I just wanted to specify, just doing admin work in the THPO office is not an administrative cost. That would be a personnel cost to run the THPO office. Grant activities requiring prior approval. Grant modifications, budget. You can always modify your budget. Even though in the application you're giving us a projection of what you think you might spend, it can always be changed. As a matter of fact, it is almost always changed at the end of the grant when you're sending in your final report. But you can always, if it's more than 10 to 15% of your total budget grant funds, you need to contact Leanne and ask her for a budget modification. But if it's less than that, you can move items in between those lines. Again, over 10 to 15% change, like if you're moving most of your personnel costs to training costs, you need to get that approved. We don't typically give extensions on the grants. They're 2 years and that's it. However, there are situations, just like in the past year, that we have given extensions for both the 2019 grant and the 2020 grant due to the COVID restrictions and issues. So it's possible, but individually we wouldn't be doing that. As I mentioned before, you can purchase equipment, but anything over $5,000 needs to be approved. You have to send in to Leanne. You can email her or you can put it in Grant Solutions why you need this piece of equipment and what you're going to do with it and how much it costs, and that you have made a reasonable attempt to do a competitive analysis of costs for this particular thing. Specifically, that would be like vehicles, you know, so you have to make sure that you get comparative costs. A lot of tribes have those kinds of restrictions in their finance office, so you have to adhere to that too. But again, it has to be competitive and reasonable costs. So, you know, no $500 hammers, you know, that type of situation. When you have items that lead up to $5,000, they're considered supplies. So those should all go under your supply line, like a copier and a computer, and those all go under supplies. Equipment is only for something that is a big purchase, you know, maybe a GPS unit or something that has a lot of components. It's one big thing with a contract that might be, or like I said, a vehicle. So. And I think that's all I'm just going to cover because I thought maybe there were specific issues and questions. We also have a quick guide, which I don't have here. I don't know if there's a way to share that, Valerie, but it's not updated, so we don't really like to give it out, but I think it's a really good overview of the THPO grant program and has a lot of good information on it. So if you're interested in that, maybe you can contact Leanne or Valerie and we can get that to you. So.
Thank you, Madeline. To clarify, did you say a quick guide?
Yeah, it's a quick guide. You know, a while ago, Ginger had put together just more of a little booklet. You know, so it takes some of the HPF manual because the Historic Preservation Fund manual is really geared towards states. So this was for THPOs, but we haven't updated it and we can't put it on the website because of different reasons. So,
okay,
well,
we could put it on our website if that would be great with you guys.
Well, it has to be 508 compliant. So,
okay.
Let me see. Let me stop sharing.
Well, let me know what our options are for sharing, and we'll do what we can.
Well, I think if somebody specifically reached out, we would send it to them. That's how.
Okay. But they would have to know it exists first.
Yeah. Well, I thought it would be good for new THPOs. Okay. We can talk about it.
Okay, that would be good. I actually am curious to see it myself.
Sure.
And we realize you guys have constraints, but want to share as much information as we possibly can here. So. You mentioned the grants manual. Are there any discussions about picking that back up and populating the THPO side of that?
Well, that is a big lift. And that's what that's what the quick guide was supposed to help with. The HBF manual in general needs a lot of updating, but we've tried to several times and it's just very complex. And so it wasn't as easy as we thought it would be, plus staffing and whatnot. So there have been several attempts to update it in general. And yes, to include THPOs in that.
Okay. So we've had a question come in from Darren, who wants to know about land area.
Yeah. Land area has to be, that would have to go through the THPO program. And, you know, that was Jamie Lee Marks. And right now, Jennifer, her boss, is handling that. So any questions about land base needs to be addressed to the THPO program. And I should have put that email in the chat. Leanne, do you think you could get that and put it in the chat for people if they have questions for the THPO program?
THPO program email.
Yeah.
So Darren's question is, his tribe is waiting for Congress to pass a bill to expand the boundaries, and how would that affect the grant? So it sounds like when that bill passes Congress, then he would need to get in touch with the THPO program.
Right, and I think it goes through BIA. We have to get a letter from BIA and they validate that. But again, I'm not as clear on those issues as the grant funds.
That would make sense actually, because you guys need a letter from BIA for new THPOs as well.
Exactly. We don't move forward and we don't change that until we get something from them.
Okay. And Jewel had asked, out of curiosity, is there also a requirement for SHPOs to submit annual reports to the Park Service?
Oh,
We
yeah.
answered that. And I want to clarify, there's the two-part requirement as well for the SHPO grant, and then the annual.
They have the same requirements, although the SHPOs have to report on a lot more. They have a lot more reporting than the THPOs do. Their requirements are much more extensive.
Okay, that's good to know actually, and thank you for asking that, Jewel. This has come up in some other discussions and webinars that we've had.
Yes, they have to enter all their projects, every project. They have to account for all their matching funds. They are required to match. You know, they have that 40% match requirement. THPOs do not have to match. As a matter of fact, all their money that isn't spent with grant funds can be appropriated any way they feel they think appropriate. So there's a big difference in the amount of reporting that the SHPOs have to do. Of course, they get a lot more money, so.
That is good information. Don't see any other questions in the chat box. And there's that THPO program email. Thank you, Leanne. What other questions do folks have while we have Madeline here?
And of course, you can ask any question you want. Leanne is happy to answer questions. I am too. We also have a general number, email address. I think it's at the end of the slide. I think I put, if you want the slide, I can give that to you, Valerie. So we're happy to answer, because there are always going to be questions that come up during the year that you won't know the answers to. So that's what we're here for, to help you through that process, help you through the bureaucracy of grant reporting and applications. And we do ask that you please do apply when you need right away so that we can process your grant. We have over 200 THPOs now, and so it's a lot of work just to get through all that grant reporting, approval, and grant releasing. You can imagine 200 grants to get through is a lot.
Yeah, I know you and Ginger were dividing it up.
Yeah. Well, poor Leanne is doing most of it herself now.
Oh gosh.
but I'm helping, you know, and she has some help. So.
Okay. Has Madeline, from your perspective, the transition to grant solutions gone okay? I was really apprehensive when I saw that was going to be a system switch.
Well, you know, anytime there's a change, especially with the federal government, they're not always, you know, built to order. So there's a lot of quirks that have to be worked out. But I think we've made a pretty good transition. It did take us a bit learning how to, you know, make it work for us and for our programs. So far, we've done, I think a lot of the THPOs have been processed for this past year as grants, and the states are just now being processed. So we're not going to let Leanne talk about it because she's been fighting with the poor system, you know, trying to make it work. But I think it'll work out really well. The interesting thing is that THPOs can get in there and add some notes to their reporting. They can report through grant solutions. The finance people can report the 425 through there. So I think they'll like that. So I think in the end, it's really going to work out for us. We just have to work out the kinks as usual.
Yeah, I know all of these federal systems are, agencies have different ones, and then there's SAM, and we deal with some of that stuff.
But I think with the 200 THPO, over 200 THPOs, I think that helps with the reporting for sure. I mean, applications are still going through grants.gov, but the reporting, they get notifications of when the reports are due. So I think in the end, it's going to be much more efficient. Not the best, but pretty good.
Okay. So here's a question from Anne. If a THPO is requested or invited to be part of a NAGPRO committee, they cannot apply their time to this grant.
Correct. They need to use the personnel costs from the tribe side, or you have to be careful of the personnel costs because, you know, I mean, the grants aren't that much, but a lot of people apply their grant towards their salaries. So you have to be careful that you're not doing certain activities that aren't assumed from the THPO with that money.
Mm-hmm. And that list of duties, we talked about that in our May workshop, taking people through the Park Service application. So there's a list of 10 duties that you may choose to assume from the SHPO when you stand up your THPO program. And there's a couple that are required, and there's a couple that THPOs don't typically do. But then that list, as it ends up in that MOA with the Secretary of the Interior, that will remain the list of things that they can fall back on when they have a question about what they can use these funds for. And here's a reminder from Leanne to get enrolled with ASAP. Can you tell us what that is? Mm-hmm.
Sure. ASAP is our, that's how you get money. That's how you get paid. So when a new THPO, they should make sure that they are enrolled in the ASAP payroll payment system. I don't have that information here, but most tribes are enrolled in ASAP because it's used by a lot of other agencies. But that's where you draw down your funds from. And in order to get in, for us to move the grant money, we have to move it into the ASAP account. So you have to make sure that you're registered with SAM and that you're registered specifically with NPS on the ASAP account. Like I said, a lot of tribes have ASAP, but they may only have it from a different bureau, like BIA or HUD or something. So they have to apply specifically for NPS registration, which they can do through the website. We have information on ASAP on our website, which is also a good tool for any questions that you have. I think I put, there's like a reporting section for the THPOs. You could just search for NPS THPO program, grant program, and it comes up.
So here's a question that also is maybe not in your purview, but as a follow-up to the NAGPRO one, I thought I'd go ahead and ask. There are NAGPRO grants, yes?
Yes.
Is that Park Service?
Yeah, that's with our colleagues right down the hall if we were still in the building. So yeah, NAGPRO duty, repatriation grants, and there's a I don't want to speak to them because I might mess it up, but yeah, there are NATHPO.
Okay, I was going to follow up with, do they have to be more project based or
There are some that are project based, and there are some that are repatriation. Like if the tribe needed to go to a museum, they would cover the costs of that travel and that kind of thing.
Okay.
But I don't have the specifics, and I don't want to speak to it. That would be Sarah Glass, who is NACPRA grant coordinator.
Okay, and that information is on there.
It's on their website. Yeah.
We will put that link in the chat box here. And there is Sarah's email address.
That's a good questions.
Madeline, from your perspective, you've been doing this for a while. Can you speak to any best practices for THPO financial management, strategies that the THPOs have found to be useful? And then also similarly, are there things that make your life difficult that folks could avoid?
Oh, that's so considerate. I don't know that I have any special tips because it depends on the size of the tribe. However, like I think I mentioned in the PowerPoint, you should really make friends with your financial people, because if you are not the ones filling out, some THPOs get to fill out their financial documents and submit them, but then others have to go through the financial department or office or financial people in their tribe. So it's very important to have a good relationship with those folks, because they can hold up your grant because they haven't submitted a report. Until we get all the financial report at the end of the year, and that includes the annual and the final closeout where you report how much money you've spent, then we can't issue your next grant. Another thing that I see, and if you were still working with me, is I hate to give any money back, because as the THPO program, we have so little money. You as THPOs get so little money to recapture any of that because you didn't spend the money on time is really frustrating to me. So I always tell the THPOs, make sure you are checking by June or July how much funding you still have left, because you want to make sure that you are expending it by the end of the year. I hate, and I will make finance people rework their budget if they can to put tribal costs towards that grant. So that's another reason to have a good relationship with your tribe, with your finance people, so that they are moving the money in the right areas. That would be my one big thing. Because it's hard to justify to Congress that we need more money if tribes are giving it back at the end of the year, as you can imagine. So, big issue. Sometimes it happens where the money is all a one-man woman THPO shop, and so if that position goes empty, nothing gets done in that position, so that funding goes to waste. I can understand that, but at the same time, let's try not to make that.
And you mentioned the tribal heritage grants. Do unused funds go back into that, or just
no
funds that are not applied for?
Yeah, that's only because it's 2-year money. So any funding that doesn't get expended by the end of the second year is just lost. But if tribes don't apply for their apportionment piece, then we have a year to apply that money to the grant program. But it's lost at the end of the year, the second year. We have 2 years to obligate it. And tribes, whether or not they take a grant, they're apportioned an amount. So that's why sometimes tribes decide not to apply for their funds. And that's where the money goes. So.
Okay. And I do know of a couple well-funded tribes out there who don't apply for the grant.
Yeah,
so
they can apportion that amount because we can't tell them that they're not included.
Right.
And but THPOs can apply for a tribal heritage grant, which is an excellent opportunity to do a specific project that you don't have funds for. So it can be under the leadership of a THPO, but the THPO cannot apply any of their time funding wise towards it. So if you maybe another staff person or contracting somebody to do a survey, that type of work is always a good idea for THPOs.
Okay. And importantly for tribes without a THPO as well.
Oh, absolutely. And Hawaiian and Native Alaska groups.
Mm-hmm. Melissa's putting a link to the tribal heritage grants in
that's nice.
The chat box here.
We're in the middle right now of determining those applications and those grants.
The tribal heritage grants?
Tribal heritage grants, yeah.
Okay. And here's
I also put the NATHPO grant in there, the link.
Great.
And here's a question from Patricia. Is there a guide for fiscal offices when there are new fiscal personnel?
A guide, I would give them the grant agreement. I would give them the grant agreement, and it specifies reporting dates, those kinds of things, and what the expenses are and what the requirements are. Anybody who's in who works in a finance office with federal grants probably understands the requirements of 2 CFR 200. But all that information is spelled out in the grant agreement, and that's why fiscal officers usually need to have it. So make sure that you send once you get your grant agreement, to send it on to the finance office as well. If that's what, I hope that answers that question. I'm not quite sure I understood it properly.
Yeah, Patricia, please speak up if you need additional information on that question. Okay, so that's the THPO grant, the tribal heritage grants, the NAGPRO grants next door. Are there other Park Service grants that tribes and THPOs should be aware of? And we're going to talk this afternoon more generally about other sources of funding, but from your perspective.
I'm sure there are other grants. I don't know of any specific. Within our own division, we have like the underrepresented community grants, which are for National Register nominations. So a tribe would be considered that community if they have any properties that they would like to nominate to the National Register. That's a competitive program. Save America's Treasures is another program for National Register properties, but it has to be at the national level, and it's also a matching grant. Those are our main ones, I think, that I can think of. But I wouldn't say there aren't any other grants out there. I just am not as familiar with like park area grants who may give something outside in their region. It's specific.
Okay, those are a couple of good ones to mention for sure. I've known THPOs who have had both of those. And I would also mention the Battlefield Protection Program.
Battlefield, yeah.
That's
That's a new, they've been opening that up to tribe in the last, 4 or 5 years. So that's a good one, yeah.
All things to watch if you have project ideas. And again, they tend to be, they have their own criteria, as Madeline mentioned. So I think Save America's Treasures needs to be relevant to a landmark, a National Historic Landmark.
It can be a National Register too, but it has to be at the national level in the National Register, not just the state or local.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, and HLs or an NHL.
Yeah, right.
But they require a match, which is always sometimes hard to come up with matching funds for grants.
Yeah, right.
But that's a lot of money.
I was going to ask if that could be demonstrated with, can that be an in-kind match?
Oh, absolutely. In-kind, yeah.
Staff time.
Volunteer, yeah.
Okay.
But that's up to $500,000. So that's a lot of money for a property or site, yeah.
And we realize it's so tricky to look for these kinds of things and try to come up with a project idea that fits within the criteria. It is also something that the tribe really needs to do. And it's so important that these THPO grants and the line within the HPF continue to increase on the tribal front. And this is a main source of advocacy for me, for NATHPO on the DC side of things. And one point that I make is SHPOs, they don't have more every year. They have the same number. And fortunately, we do have more THPOs every year and will continue to. In 1998, there were 12. And it's kind of a point of pride for many of them that they were among the first 12 THPOs, but now there are over 200. And although the total appropriated amount for that THPO slice of the pie has been growing, it's been tracking the growth of the number of THPOs. And so the average amount has actually decreased a little bit from the very first year that there were THPOs. And I will note, for those of you who weren't here yesterday, and sorry if I'm repeating myself, that if you have seen the president's budget, which came out a couple of weeks ago, and admittedly is a placeholder and a signaling of priorities as much as it is an indicator of what the federal budget will actually end up being after the House process and the Senate process and the reconciliation process. And for the past 4 years, it's just been a, okay, whatever, president's budget, that guy. But this year, we actually see a 50% increase in the THPO line item as opposed to $1 or $2 million. And I count that as a huge victory, even if it is a placeholder and a signaling of priorities for the work of NATHPO and our members and partners and tribes in making that point about the need and about the importance of this work. This is rebuilding the foundations of culture that we're talking about here. And I think a lot of the news stories that we're seeing every day lately just illustrate so vividly the effects of historical trauma and the need moving forward. And that's the work that THPOs do. And that there needs to be funding for that. So
I know that's why, not to cut you off, that's why I'm so adamant that there not be any money returned, because that makes it seem like we're not using what we have. So we can't justify getting more if we're returning funds. So
yeah, exactly.
So it's really hard. So really, really pay attention to your expenses and make sure they're expended as quickly as you can so that there's nothing left over by the end of the fiscal year, because it has to all be expended by the end of September for that second closeout grant.
For the second year.
Yeah, for the second.
And I think there's some, you're right, there's some confusion about the 2-year grant and then the annual reporting in addition to the milestone reporting. So another sort of NATHPO housekeeping note too, we have annual dues for membership, for regular membership of THPOs, and also associate membership of aspiring THPOs. And we've been having some discussions about the best time to send invoices and requests for that, because I inherited a system wherein we waited for THPOs to actually get their grant before asking. And as the federal budget process slipped later and later, and then into the next fiscal year, we sort of risk effectively losing a dues year. And we're a small nonprofit. So I've been having some discussions lately about when the best time is for that, because I get, one-off requests sort of this time of year about getting an invoice because folks need to close out that grant and make sure that all that money is spent. We're planning to send out a full round of invoices in August, since that's when our cycle had slipped to. So we're getting a new, go ahead.
Sorry, I was gonna say, and they can apply that once it's invoiced, they can apply expenses to it. It doesn't have to actually be paid out.
Okay. I was going to say we're getting a new member management platform as well, and a new website that will integrate a lot of these functions. But then next year we can look to sending out invoices earlier in the year and providing a longer window for folks who do need to wait, but also folks who need to go ahead and spend it before it gets accounted for somewhere else. And I also wanted to note that for those of you out there who are interested in joining NATHPO, but dues are a problem, please communicate that with us. We have offered a fee waived option for this year so that you can experience the benefits of being a NATHPO member, and then plan for that in your budget next year if you find that to be worthwhile. It's not about the dues, it's about what we can do together, and the more of us there are in the family of THPOs, then the stronger our voices in DC and nationwide. So please do consider joining NATHPO. Let me just check for questions here. Leanne says URC grants. I don't know what that is.
That's the underrepresented community grant.
Great. Okay. Mary asks, is there any other grants to help with per diem and travel for consultation with museums?
That would be your NATHPO grant.
And Melissa has put a link to the grants manual in there, and that's where you will notice that the THPO section remains on the to-do list of you guys, but
not for want of trying.
Oh, I know, believe me, I know. But there's some good information, I think, in the THPO section that can be referenced, since what you're doing is assuming the duties of THPO or something.
Exactly, it's chapter 6, and maybe I can put that quick guide in the chat. I can load it.
And here's another question from Anne. Just to clarify, the THPO cannot be the one to conduct an archaeological survey on tribal lands, correct? However, a THPO can apply for the Tribal Heritage Grant, then they can participate in the survey. Would this be project specific?
I'm not sure what you mean by tribal lands, but if the THPO is an archaeologist, they can do it. They just have to be qualified.
Yeah, I know a lot of THPOs who do
surveys, yeah. So I'm not quite sure. You can't seem to.
Project specific. No, and I know a lot of THPOs who do survey and use the grant for that.
Yeah, it's allowable.
One thing that's come up recently that I've been learning about, actually, and maybe we'll hear more about this afternoon, is 638 contracts, which is through BIA. And what that is when a tribe assumes the functions of a federal agency on tribal land, then they can be paid through BIA for that work. And I've been trying to learn about possibilities for THPOs within that process. And an important piece of information is that THPOs assume the duties of the THPO, not of a federal agency. So you can't directly, THPOs cannot, 638 their THPO functions directly. But if archaeology is performed, ideally by someone other than the THPO, then that is a function of BIA. And that can be 638'd. And there are tribes who do that, and who also work with other offices and departments within the tribe. Forestry, for example, was one that came up yesterday, who can work out some 638 arrangements within the tribe. So that sort of relates to that question. How do you qualify as an archaeologist? Is Tina, I assume this is a question you're asking. I was going to toss that to John Welch, but he is signing off. Is Mary still there? Mary, can I call on you or Jewel to speak to this question about qualifying as an archaeologist? There are Secretary of the Interior standards that outline.
Exactly. I wouldn't try to quote them here, but there's you have to have a certain amount of years experience or field work, education, etc.
And there are some factors of that can be up to the tribe as well.
Yeah.
And there are many THPOs who are not, you know, archaeologists. There's a Secretary of the Interior standards. There's also a register of professional archaeologists that are more letters you can put after your name if you meet those standards and criteria.
This is Mary. I'm sorry I didn't have my microphone set up. For the Secretary of Interior standards, you have to have a master's degree in anthropology, archaeology, historic preservation, some related field to meet those standards. So like BLM, National Park Service, all the federal land managing agencies require that to get a permit to survey on their land. So that's for the Secretary of Interior standards. Now, to be a monitor or to assist in doing archaeological surveys, you don't have to have a degree. It's good to have some training. We sort of talked about that yesterday for the paraprofessionals, but that's available to a lot of people. And actually, I've been working with Logan Simpson where we've been training tribal members to participate in surveys and monitoring and doing damage assessment on looted sites. So there's a range of things that are available, but I think the question was, if you want to be the archaeologist, you have to have a master's degree.
And we've given tribal heritage grants to tribes that who to train tribal monitors. So, you know, so it's always something, an option to compete for a project grant to train tribal monitors for doing these things outside of the grant funds.
Okay. I would actually be curious who helps set that up and provide that training myself.
But yeah, it has to be a qualified kind of archaeologist, or, you know, THPO. I think like Ira Matt would be able to answer that. THPO.
Yeah, he probably would. And he's back over there.
He is.
Okay.
They also have that whole new program out in what college is that?
Oh, it's Salish Kootenai College.
Yeah.
He's from there actually.
Yeah.
Not college, but that's his tribe.
Yeah.
They do. In case folks aren't aware, Salish Kootenai College in Montana does have a new and one of a kind THPO program. I believe it's a 4-year degree program of THPO training, and we were going to have a summit there with ACHP last year, which we need to revisit, but I've not gone to their website in a while to see what's going on with the college. ACHP, I know, is going to have an intern this summer who's part of that program.
Oh,
So
wow, that's great.
yeah, they're doing stuff.
Definitely doing things.
I'm trying to think of other leading questions here. So we've been talking about the various cycles and deadlines, and to that point, we have tried to be clear that if you're in the process of setting up a THPO program, the application that's required can be submitted at any time throughout the year, but that the THPO program would like to see that, have that in hand, including the signed agreement by July 31st, in order to be able to apply for the grant in the following year.
Has to be signed by the 31st, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And that's up to the THPO program, but that's the deadline, just to make the next fiscal year.
Because you guys have to do all the...
You have to do all this other, prep work.
Right.
And the appropriation from Congress is supposed to happen, like in October, but,
Right. Mary, are you asking about the Salish Kootenai? Trying to pull it up here. Tribal Historic Preservation Associate and Bachelor degree.
Great program. Yeah, I did. I mean, I tried to simplify the grant requirements, and just because it can be overwhelming as far as deadlines and timeframes and instructions on how to do it. I didn't submit any of that because it changes every year, and we, sorry, helicopters. And we do email or send a bulletin every year or every grant period to make sure that you're aware of when things are due. So we never let it. So just please make sure you're paying attention to our emails when we send that up, when we send them, so that you don't miss the deadlines and dates, and that we're not, desperately trying to call you to give you money. Because there's 200 of them now. It's hard.
Do those come from the THPO_program address?
No, that comes from the Steel Pig General. I have that at the end of the slideshow. I don't know if I submitted.
Okay. We will put that back up. Yep. Actually, Leanne, I was just going to address that.
She's just always ahead of me.
Check your junk mail too for the bulletins. I know that firewalls in Indian country can be.
Yes, check your, save us as a good sender so that you get the
whitelist with a common request we have from here too. And in fact, please add NATHPO to your whitelist list as well. info@nathpo.org, and Leanne can put the Steel Pig email address back in there so that you guys can have a better chance of actually getting correspondences from both of us.
Yeah. Make us your friend.
Okay, well, I appreciate, Madeline, that you kept your presentation brief, but I'm going to put you on the spot and ask if there are other sort of categories of information that you may touch on in presentations that you tailor to different audiences, to THPOs who have been doing this for a while, or other tribal folks that you speak to.
Well, no, not really. I mean, we do try to break down. Ginger created a YouTube video on how to do applications and end of year reporting. So we have those on our YouTube channel. So that is some kind of training that we usually give. That's the kind of presentation. And then of course we break down the Tribal Heritage Grant Program a little bit more, and how and what categories of projects are available for that program. But for the THPOs, it's pretty much here. I mean, for program information, Jamie Lee used to give a presentation, and that would be more program specific as opposed to grants, more about your THPO program versus what the grant pays for. So thank you, Valerie. See, we have lots of information. We may try to do an updated training on reporting. I can't guarantee it.
There's one line or another with fear, pain.
Is that me? Sorry. What am I watching there? Oh, go and watch that one later on the Park Service YouTube channel. Sounds very interesting. There's an interesting assortment of stuff there.
But like I said, both Leanne and I are available for any questions that you may have. I mean, that's what we're here for. It's a confusing process, and we try.
Oh, well, we appreciate your candor.
Well, we try to make it simple. I mean, but I know that it can be confusing if you're not used to it. I always equate it to when I have to do my, when I have to go in and do travel, because it's not something I do, and I have to go in and do my travel report. It's like, to me, I do it every year, but I can never remember how to do it. So I can imagine that's how the THPOs must feel when they have to do their reporting and application. So then you have to go through all the instructions. So we try to break it down so that it's easier.
Yeah, we realized you guys didn't create the process and the rules. You just try to make it accessible.
Exactly.
That's our messaging about the application too. It kind of seems to be is what it is, but you guys are there to help, and we
The
appreciate
states
you.
have to do that too. And they, like I said, they even have more paperwork when they apply, that they have so many boxes that have to be checked for them that.
Alrighty, well, it seems like folks either have all their questions answered or don't know what questions to ask. I always wonder. We don't want to keep you any longer though, Madeline, if you don't, if we're not getting questions. I'll leave the line open, and folks can go and multitask if you need to, or you can unmute yourselves and have some discussion amongst yourselves if that's what you would like to do. And we will reconvene. We're really ahead of schedule here.
That was too brief.
At 11:30 Pacific, 2:30 Eastern, we're going to come back and hear from Guy Mora, current THPO at the Confederated Tribes of the Colville Reservation, about sourcing other types of funding for your THPO program. And rather than, he's not on here now, rather than ask him to start early, we're just going to stick to schedule and give everyone a nice long break here. And Madeline and Leanne, thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate hearing this instruction from the official perspective, and also hearing from you and getting to know you a little bit, putting a face with the name, and especially, as always, hearing that you're available, you're here to help, and we have your contact information, we have the websites, and I always direct people to you if they come to NATHPO with Park Service questions, and we'll continue to do so. We know how hard you guys are working, and hope that things are starting to get better in the new administration, and look forward to continuing to work with you.
Thank you. Well, thank you for the opportunity to talk to you all. It's always a pleasure.
Sure. Thanks, Madeline.
Bye.
Bye. we are recording to let you know, so that this will be available to watch at a later date for folks who are not able to join us at this time, and or if you want to refresh yourself on some aspect of it. We had, oh, there he is. See, we had our next speaker. Now I don't see him. Zoom likes to move people around on me. So this morning we heard the official take from Madeline Kahns, who manages the THPO grants at the Park Service, on applying for those, reporting on those, what's fundable and what's not, and any other things that you would like to know from the Park Service perspective. And Madeline remains, as always, available, an email or a phone call away, to assist you as best she can. She really wants as many people as possible to get as much money as possible out of this, and that's what she's there for. And next we're going to hear from a current THPO and longtime NATHPO member. Guy Mora is the THPO at the Confederated Tribes of Colville Reservation in Washington, and I'm not ashamed to say that he's been there since the year I was born. So we're really looking forward to hearing what Guy has to say about seeking other sources of funding to supplement what you may be eligible to apply for from the Park Service. And Guy was recommended to me to speak about this topic from several different colleagues. So he is the expert, and I am going to make Guy a co-host so that he can share his screen with us. And take it away, Guy.
Good morning from here.
Thank you for joining us. It's nice to put a face with the name.
So I know how breaks go, so I will speak briefly with some background, and then I'll share my screen and do the presentation and give folks a chance to rejoin the group. I am not a tribal member. I'm an archaeologist, or I used to be long ago an archaeologist. I came west in 1978 to work with the University of Washington, the Colville Confederated Tribes, and the Army Corps of Engineers on a large project on the Colville Reservation. I was super excited to be working with people who didn't think about cultural resources and archaeology simply as protecting resources or looking for cool stuff or things like that. And so I continued to work with the Colville tribes off and on for a decade or two more. And then I became a direct contractor with them for a few years. And in 1997, I became a full-time employee, and I have been with the Colville tribes ever since. I started with the program to help develop a traditional cultural properties sub grouping within the program. At the time, there were 4 of us. Now there are about 35 people in the program. We operate about 50 active contracts and budgets simultaneously throughout the year. Before COVID, we actually were up in the mid 40s because we had a lot of tribal youth from the high schools and tribal interns from the colleges that worked with us as well. Sorry, I got distracted. People are waving at me through the window. So I think without further ado, if I can go ahead and share my screen, I will get us going. And I have a tendency to mumble sometimes and speak way too quickly. So please just let me know if that becomes a problem. And I have a longish PowerPoint. I want to just move through it quickly so people can have an idea of the full range of things I'm ready to talk about when we get to the question and answer section. So I do not any longer know if you guys can see the screen or not. Can
Yep,
you
it
see?
looks great.
Okay, great. So more than archaeology, cultural resource management. So the first thing is, as a THPO, you do more than just protect resources. THPOs protect tribal interests, and they represent tribal sovereignty using professional cultural resource management techniques and with the understanding of the cultures that they represent for each and everybody's tribe. Research should be directed towards protecting the tribal rights, not only in terms of the past, but also in contemporary political and legal matters. Tribal sovereignty, although based in legal documents and treaties and laws, really is settled in Indian culture. So just some examples of what I'm talking about. This program, when we do work to represent the tribe, we work on such contemporary issues like fishing rights. And we had an icicle fishing case, which is a river out here in the Pacific Northwest where the Colville tribes are located in north central Washington state. And it was to regain rights that we had lost over 100 years ago. One of our constituent tribes in the Colville tribes, there are 12 tribes and bands in the Colville tribes, is the Sinixt, or also called the Arrow Lakes, from central British Columbia in Canada. And Canada determined that the Sinixt people were extinct in 1956, and that was the end of our participation in Canada until less than 3 months ago, when we won a Canadian Supreme Court case, once again recognizing our vested traditional rights for hunting and fishing in Canada, and we are going to continue to pursue that for land and reparation settlements associated. And another thing that this tribe was deeply involved in for 2 decades was the Ancient One case, and some know it better perhaps as Kennewick Man. There was an inadvertent discovery of human remains along the Columbia River, and the courts determined that it wasn't a quote-unquote Native American under their definition, because a lot of non-tribal archaeologists suggested that this individual was so old that he was something other than Native American, and they proffered a few options, none of them very good, and it took 20 years and a series of DNA tests to finally close that operation down. And so again, this program and the Confederated Tribes were one of the claimant tribes in the case, and we were the ones that did the DNA that finally brought it to closure. The other case that we worked on recently, and NATHPO was assisting and providing help with this, was a case against Shell Corporation of North America to develop an off-main river pump storage system along the Columbia River. And it just turned out that the place they selected was in a previously unidentified site, and it was a site type which we considered to have sensitive significance to the tribe. They were talus features, rock features that we associated with ceremonial activities, and it took us several years, but we finally won that case as well. And again, when we do these things, it's the information that comes from the THPO office, the mapping and understanding of the tribal history from these archaeological sites, and the tribal association from named places and traditional use areas, that we have to gather together, we, the THPO office, gather together and provide to our legal representatives so that they can go out in the contemporary real world and apply this ancient cultural knowledge and contemporary cultural traditions to satisfy the tribal needs and to represent our sovereignty. So one really important aspect of our program is that we are fortunate enough to work out of the Pacific Northwest, which has tons of public lands and lots of federal agencies and some fairly progressive and liberal state governments. And so there is actually a lot of funding available in the Pacific Northwest that I am unsure exists in such abundance elsewhere, but you still have to go out and seek that funding. And so you need to seek additional tribal program support. And I'll talk about each of these in a little bit more detail. You need to seek additional tribal funding. You need to write grants, and you need to seek contracts. You will need help because most of your NPS THPO grants only fund enough for the THPO, as you are all aware, for one full-time position. I'm sorry, you're gonna hear my phone ring in the background. I forgot to unplug it. So what kind of help? So budget help. If you can't do your own tribe's budget forms or prepare budgets for outside agencies, you really are gonna have to find someone who can do that, because preparing budgets is the whole basis of figuring out how to get funding, or you can learn how to do it. So you can hire into your program or borrow from another program an administrative assistant that has experience preparing budgets, or you can ask someone in the tribal accounting program to assist you with preparing budgets. And I actually have an example budget sheet, which I will walk people through later, just to show, you know, the basic outline of how somebody goes through developing budgets. Okay, so what is a practical process for doing that, doing all of this? Because it's overwhelming. When I sit here and talk about having 35 people in the program and doing 50 contracts, it's like, how do you get there? The way you get there is by doing things incrementally. You build relationships, like forming some kind of relationship for somebody to help you prepare your budgets in these early days before you have the funding to have your own budget specialist. So you can start with smaller grants and contracts to do that. You have to focus on what you want to do. Do one thing at a time. If you try to write 7 grants, enter 14 contracts, and go to your tribal administrators and policy level people and ask for 5 or 6 different things all at once, you're going to get lost. Just pick something that you think is the primary or most important thing you want to work toward and focus on that. And if you don't succeed, try it again a couple of times, then pick something else. Don't overthink things. Don't wait until you have every perfect detail done is good. Getting the budget out, getting a request for a proposal completed so you can get a contract, getting a grant proposal out the door is the first thing you need to do. And if you do not get a grant, for example, or if you're not successful in receiving a contract, ask them why, and people will tell you. They may not tell you, they may just inform you that you haven't received the grant. But if you called up and you say, so I didn't get the grant, wow, how can I get the grant? What did I do wrong? What can I do better? And most of the time people are really good about doing that. So just be persistent and keep resubmitting, renegotiating, and asking again from all those groups for whatever you are seeking. What does my tribe have that others need? So you're sitting there going, well, that's great. What am I going to contract for? What am I going to write grants about? So tribal rights are based in tribal culture, and your tribe are those most knowledgeable about the history, customs, language, and what constitutes traditional information and significance. And you should really start trying to build your program around that. If you already have archaeologists and architectural historians on your staff and tribal elders that can help you, and you can afford to hire technicians, then you can compete in a larger arena. But there's no guarantee that your archaeologists, your architectural historians are going to be able to help you do budgets. They're not going to know what kind of contracts you want to compete for. So you really need to direct the program in a fashion that heads for achieving the goals and aims that you as the THPO in conjunction with your tribal leadership have set as your path. If you don't have archaeologists that can go out and do archaeology contracts, or architectural historians, or some of that other type of office staff at this point in time, you are still the most knowledgeable person, or a person who knows who the most knowledgeable people are within your tribe about traditional ecological knowledge, about named places, about traditional plants, and about other types of traditional cultural information. And I will show you some products that we have worked on here and give you a link to a website that will show you some of the other things that we do within our program that are based solely on those, that don't even involve the big archaeology contracts that we do. So what are some of these avenues? So the program funding support, many THPOs are actually housed within like a cultural resources program. We are here, we are in the history/archaeology program here. Some of them are in a cultural preservation program, or they're within a language program. And hopefully those programs already have people who can help you with budgets and help you write scopes of work to respond to requests for proposals from agencies to do cultural resources work. And they should have the experience working with the governing body that you may not have if you're a new THPO. It's like, well, how do I get what I'm interested in front of my governing body, or in front of the executive director of the tribe, or in front of my division manager? And other people in associated programs will have the answers to that because they've already done it for years. And then seeking funding from the tribe itself. So the first thing that you have to do, if you're going to go to your tribal leadership and ask for money, is you need to prepare a list of your unmet needs. And you need a justification for those. You can't just say, well, we need a rig. And they go, okay, what kind of a rig do you want? And you go, well, I want a 2021 Subaru station wagon or something. And they'll go, well, why do you need that? So you need to be prepared to answer why you need that type of a vehicle as opposed to a pickup truck or a Suburban or something like that. And the types of unmet needs you will have is your professional staff that you're supposed to have as THPOs, archaeologists and historians, your technical staff and administrative staff, travel and training funding, office supplies, equipment, tools, phones, internet, and for both the office and the field. So you're going to need all those things eventually. Present the list to your department head, executive director, or tribal government, and request assistance getting those things. Writing grants. Okay, so I'm not going to bore you about where to find grants. If you Google Native American grants, you will find thousands of hits, places where you can go and look for funding, and you can narrow it down to your particular needs, your particular geographic location, and oftentimes even to your particular tribal area, you know, for grants for tribes in Idaho or something like that. Take a grant writing class if you can. You can do this these days online because of all the COVID stuff. Lots of this is online, or you can do it in person. Or you can work with the tribal grant writers, or there are tons of firms that are happy to help write grants, but they take a chunk of the money, and they will also take a lot of your time explaining things to them. If you are hesitant to take a grant writing class because you don't know anything about grants, and you're not the world's greatest writer, and you never liked being a student in the first place, take it at whatever level you want to do it. Because if you learn 40% of what they have to offer, that's 40% more than you had before. It gives you a place to start. Seek grants documenting your traditional cultural places, your ecological knowledge, language, cultural practices, main places. Don't skip that. You can all read as well as I am sure. A lot of people are tempted to go after a $5,000 grant because it is small and it's easy to fill out the grant application. But by the time you get done doing it, you will have fully expended the $5,000 on getting the grant in place, trying to do some small bit of work, and then giving people your deliverables. It's almost not worth the time and trouble unless you want something specific, like you want to spend $1,200 to get a big piece of cedar so you can make a cedar canoe. Things like that work. But if you really wanted to help develop your program, you should really start request at the $30,000 range or above. As far as you can go, the sky's the limit. There's grantors out there that will give you $1 million if you've got the right stuff. We've never had the right stuff to get $1 million grant, but I mean, there are those who can. And if you don't get the grant, back to my other point, ask them, why did we not get this grant? We filled it out. We were really proud of the work we did. And then it came back and said, no, thank you. So why did you tell us that? Now getting contracts. So see contracts in those cultural disciplines I've already talked about, the things that you know about. This avoids you having to compete, and this is a roadblock you are all going to hit against small business set-asides. So if the tribe says the Green River is in our traditional territory, and our people know the Green River as much as anybody else does, and we want to be the ones conducting an archaeological inventory on the Green River, the agency will probably say, well, you have to be a small business. The Small Business Administration insists that those projects go to a small business. So if your tribe is not a small business, and not many are, say, we know the Green River better than anybody, and we want to do a study on the named places. We want to do a study about hunting and gathering along the Green River. We want to go out and relocate these legendary sites along the Green River, and we are willing to share X amount of this information to fulfill some contractual obligation. Or you can become a 501c nonprofit, and then you can also apply for things as a small business yourself. Okay. And lots of tribes have a system for having people set up a 501c within their larger framework. No non-tribal firm is going to be able to tell you about the TCPs on the Green River, or what your elders know about the Green River, or what the name of the Green River was in your language. They're not going to know those things. So those are all things that you can bring to the table in a contracting fashion. Also works with the grants. So even if it is archaeology, what can the tribe provide that non-tribal archaeologists can't? And now I'm going to go back to that same theme of familiarity. The first THPO for the Colville tribes I worked with for many years, and she'd always say, well, these people came out and they did an archaeological inventory along the river, and they went out and did that inventory in one day, in one season, one time, and they didn't see anything. But if they had gone out in this season, or if they had gone back several times, or if they'd gone back when the water was down or the snow was on the ground, or this or that, they would have seen things. So that familiarity is something else that you can bring even to an archaeological survey. If you see a traditional plant cluster or something like that, you can be aware to look for sites that might be associated with harvesting that resource. There's a lot of things that you as a tribe and a THPO can bring to even the most basic of quote unquote archaeological projects. Make partnerships, not enemies. It's really easy to get frustrated with agency personnel at the federal, state, local, and municipal levels, and yell at them and build a barrier, but that's not going to help you run your program, and that will not assist your tribe in representing their sovereignty. So you don't tell people that you're going to tell them how to do it. Tell them you're going to help them. We're going to assist you in complying with the laws. We're going to assist you in conducting these surveys. Blah, 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 blah. And then consider what the advantages of some of these activities are going to be for the tribe. So just because somebody's building a road, that's not always bad. For instance, when people are doing forest practice acts, which means going out and cutting wood in the forest around here, we try to work with the elder community to understand if they leave this road and when they're done, will that allow them access to cedar trees to gather the roots or the bark? Or will this allow them access to the elk herds so that they can go up and hunt without having to walk through the woods for 4 miles? Are there jobs associated with these projects? Is there going to be housing benefits for the tribe? Will there be social services associated that are going to be beneficial to the tribe? And then you can work with them to enhance and identify those opportunities. And to be perfectly honest, lots of times when we approach corporate entities and we say, hi, this is the Colville tribes and you're doing this project, and they go, oh, wait. We would love to work with the tribe to do something like this. We want to do interpretation of traditional ways. We want to provide work opportunities for the local workforce, and the tribal community is one of those groups within that local workforce. So lots of times you can establish those relationships. And then you have to learn the laws and make them comply with those laws. And I'll talk about that more later, I think. Okay, so now that's pretty much the main thing. I'm just going to say, so this is the traditional lands of the 12 tribes of Colville Reservation. And right in the center of all those colorful areas, you'll see the word Nespelem. That is where our 1.4 million acre reservation sits within that larger traditional territory of close to 40 million acres. So you need to read those assumption agreements that you get from the National Park Service, because they don't always, they rarely say that your authority is totally confined within the exterior boundaries of your reservation. And some reservations, like I said, are 1 million acres and others are 200. So you need to make sure that your assumption agreement is understood, because they usually say how you can work with agencies within your traditional area, and that opens up a lot larger area for you to develop funding opportunities. And then learn what Section 106 is, and learn what the National Historic Preservation Act says, and NAGPRA and NEPA and executive orders and tribal, federal, state, and local laws and mandates. And then you can represent your tribal sovereignty. It is a lot easier to compel agencies to work with the tribe when you point out in the laws and the mandates where it says they have to do that anyway. And there's a link there. And again, I've made this available to folks, well, to Valerie, so she can distribute it. That takes you to our webpage, and you can just see all the services that we provide, and it's within that area. Tribes employ more anthropologists than any other organization, more than universities, more than state agencies, federal agencies, or private contractors. And those people all end up working with tribes. And if you make it clear that there is a mutual benefit between those groups and the tribe, it makes it easier to build a partnership. And like I said before, when you want to make them comply, or if we are assisting them, you can actually use the terms coerce them to do what they're supposed to do, or force them to do what they're supposed to do. And I talked about some of the products that we do that deal specifically with tribal information. So this is just a contract that we did with the Bonneville Power Administration, and actually the Bureau of Reclamation as well. And it's just about traditional cultural property overview for territories in that northern part of our land base that we showed you. And this is what we refer to as our place name document. We also do videos that talks about our history and things like that. So there's a large salmon fishery on the West Coast, and particularly in the Columbia River. And the Kettle Falls fishery has now been drowned by dams. The salmon can't get there anymore, but we prepared a documentary under contract to talk about the fishing at the Kettle Falls historically. And we talk about legends and how they apply to the landscape through the coyote stories along the Columbia River. And we also talked about the adverse, mostly, impacts of building Grand Coulee Dam on the Columbia River to the Colville tribes. However, at the same time, we provided a different perspective, which was we went out and interviewed people who worked on the dam and were employed by the dam, and tribal members who moved up to this area from other areas and ended up, meeting their wives here and having a family and settling down. I mean, there's so many stories to tell. This is a book that we did under contract once again, and it's a book of legends. And we just went to all those published legends. We didn't go and take any personal family stories. We went to the published legends, many of which have been published over 120, 30 years ago now, and we compiled them in one new document. And again, that's something you can do as a contractor. Ethnographic studies, you can read that later. I don't want to waste the whole time. So, and then this is an example of how tribes can contribute to studies and what you can contract to do. This is a map of one section of the Upper Columbia River, and it shows all the archaeological sites, and it has their Smithsonian trinomial numbers identifying the sites, and a little key showing if it was a village site or a resource site, etc. And then we took the work that we did with the named places and added that. And as you can see in some of these instances, the arrow points directly to the archaeological site, which is showing the tribal continuity through thousands of years. And then you see a bunch of named places that look like they're just way off the river and not associated with too much. So we added the ethnohistoric information, and in this instance, it was allotments. And these, when the land was taken from the tribal members, they were allowed to take allotments. And you can see now that there is a direct one-to-one correlation between where the allotted lands are and the archaeological sites and the named places. And it was like a little flash of lightning coming out of the sky that people took these allotted areas, yes, because they were in a good place to live, but they also were associated with resource gathering areas and former village sites, and people were very much taking places that allowed them to stay within that now thousands of year old tradition of where people were living and working. You can have your tribal members go out and do burial sites inspection. It's very difficult for an agency to tell a tribe that they don't have a right under a contract to go out and make sure that their sacred places are being protected and they're not being looted and they're not eroding out into a river. There's a different ways to do evaluation of archaeological sites, and all of it isn't from a purely scientific point of view. There are traditional evaluations that can be done at sites, and gathering some of those sites through testing projects is one way to get the information to interpret. Sacred places, I mean, a non-tribal member walking through a landscape, seeing something like this might say, wow, that's a cool rock, but they won't know if it has some sensitive association for tribal members. They will not understand a significance if it's associated with a legend. They're not going to know that stuff. And other types of places that have traditional significance, and other resources like traditional plants. And so one issue that the tribe has always had And you can see we're in a large reservoir here because this is a drawdown, and the entirety of what you are looking at in the flat area is an ancient ancestral cemetery, and people kept eroding from the banks for years and years and years until the tribe got the knowledge to enforce the laws, to force the agencies to live up their obligations, and to involve tribal participation to protect places. And while you can see the scale of this, we actually made them build a wall around the center portion of this entire area to protect that site. And there's the top of it. And you can see huge gabion baskets, and those folks are up at the top. Okay. I'm going to take a breath and do a time check. And budgets and contracts. I'm just showing, these are just examples of some of the contracts that we have done for doing just a pamphlet about the tribes and their history, for preparing interpretive signs to be posted in the landscape, to do a fish identification chart with the tribal names associated, we did a children's book about a Palouse village. We presented a tribal seminar, which is where I grabbed a bunch of this from, on tribal cultural resources management. So those are the types of contracts you can enter into, and that's a real contract, and that's with the Walla Walla Army Corps of Engineers, databases and spreadsheets. So we work for years, we get all this information, we establish libraries, oral histories, archaeological collections, we put all of those things in databases, we prepare budgets, as you can see, for dozens and dozens and dozens of projects, and we maintain a database of that, and all this just builds and makes it easier and easier for you to accomplish your goals. And then we have an oral history database. When I started the oral history database program, they hired me under a short-term grant to come in and just find out what there was. And we went through every drawer we could find and every program we could. And we found like 260 cassette tapes in various stages of deterioration. And we converted them to an electronic and digital format and recorded them. And we have been doing that since I began working as an employee of the tribe. And now we have about 1,800 hours of oral history, all done under contracts. And then we transcribed them so we can do keyword searches on them. So when somebody says, tell me about the huckleberry patches, when our leadership calls downstairs to this office and says, the forestry people seem to be where they are, we can do keyword searches in those hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours of oral history transcripts to represent tribal interests based off the contracts that we did. So anyway, thank you. That's it for that. And if people want, I'll run through the budget thing real quick. And if they would rather just start the questions now, I'd be happy to do that. It looks like it's break time, correct?
No, not at all. We're only going for about 45 more minutes here until 4 o'clock Eastern, and then we will conclude for the day. So I will defer to you on whether you would like to see at this point if your materials have brought up any questions for people, or whether you would like to. Okay. I know, speaking for myself, I've been taking some pretty furious notes over here, and I have a copy of your presentation, but this was amazing. Thank you so much for sharing your time and your expertise with us here. I'm just amazed at the resource that you are, and I'm hoping that other folks are finding that to be the case as well. Ideas have just been popping for things that we could do, and even, you know, ask you to do some follow-up with us on trainings in the future. I'm going to stop talking and see if folks would like to put any questions in the chat box or unmute yourselves and have some discussion here.
Hi, good morning or good afternoon. This is Lisa Kumper. I'm the THPO for Humboldt Indian Village, and I'd just like to say thank you for your presentation. It is really, really good, and I got a lot of valuable information that I can start using that we really needed. So thank you.
You're very welcome. I'm trying to go back to full screen here and I'm having trouble.
Well,
If
nobody, oh, sorry.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, if nobody has any questions, I can run through a budget form so people can have an understanding of what it is that they're gonna need assistance with to begin with and determine for themselves if they already have those skills or not.
Okay, that'd be great. I didn't know that we could turn into a 5013C. That's really interesting. You brought up the fact that, you know, the SBE and contracts, and, you know, as tribal governments, we shouldn't be held to the same standards as vendors. And in California and in San Diego, I am having such a huge issue dealing with being compared to a vendor trying to be on the subcontractors list, getting contracts. And, you know, it's been 3 years I've been trying. So here you have an answer for me to run with. And thank you. I just wanted to elaborate a little bit on how you are helping us. And sorry about my sore throat, but I'm inoculated, so I think I'll be fine.
Yes, thank you. Good luck with that. We had a lot of trouble doing that, and the tribe may not be to their advantage to set up an opportunity for you to go 501c, but hopefully they can.
And that's within the tribe to do that?
Well, so we have to do it. The tribe has a federal corporate entity, which is separate from tribal government. So while we are a tribal government program, we can establish a small business through the federal corporation aspect of the tribe.
So then does that mean that we can go through our development corporation, use that?
Yes, quite possibly that would be the answer.
I see. Okay. I think we do have one established that we did for the development corporation. Okay.
Mhm. I'm going to stop my video, folks, while I try to figure out how to make this full screen again. So, but I'm still here and we'll happy to take any more questions.
Sometimes it helps if you just go back and click on the Zoom button and it'll bring you back.
On the Zoom button.
On the Zoom, on your browser bar. The little camera.
Like at the top of the window?
Well, I'll keep looking for the Zoom button. I'm not seeing it right now.
Like along the menu bar, along the bottom, the toolbar? Is that what you mean, Lisa?
Yes.
see what I can do. Oh, I think he accidentally hung up. Oh no, there he is. Moved around on me. Oh, he just stopped sharing. Okay, you did stop sharing your screen, guy.
Yeah, I got lost for a second, but now I have my stuff back. So if there's no more questions, I will go ahead and run the budget screen.
Yeah, let's do that next. I'm sure more questions will come in before we're done. And we do have one in the chat box, actually. Could we get a copy of Cultural Resource Management Plan? Does your tribe issue plan permits for proceeding with ground disturbing activities?
Yes.
Bad job of reading that. Maybe you can read it in the chat box.
Okay, well, I understand what the question is. So we do have a cultural resources management plan. I will get it to you, Valerie, and you can share it with people who want it. We used to be pretty protective about sharing those kinds of things, but you know, this is NATHPO. And
so by that, do you mean a detailed preservation plan?
this is what ours is, yes. For exactly like planning permits and proceeding with ground disturbing activities. Yeah, we have all of that in our cultural resources management plan.
Is that internal? Would you prefer that I not put that on our website and keep it by request, or?
I think you should. I would prefer that you would distribute it by request, but it is not totally internal. It's part of our integrated resources management plan as an appendices. So it is actually ultimately a public document where someone to wend their way through the internet long enough, they could probably find it. But it'd be a lot easier for me just to shoot you a copy.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is a topic that comes up not infrequently, being the two sorts of tiers that there are, right? So you have to have a plan, sort of a overview outline for the Park Service, but nobody really has a specific one, or most people don't. But it's the kind of thing that it would be good to have. And so folks are pretty regularly looking for advice and assistance on that front. And we've toyed with the idea of having a dedicated session on that. So at least sharing yours in the short term would be appreciated.
Yeah.
Hey, Eric.
Hello, hello.
Hi, Eric.
Hey, Guy. I wish you would have been around when I first got started doing this presentation. Good Lord, I've learned a lot, and I've been there and done that, some of it.
You've been there and done everything.
I feel like I'm starting to get a little bit of wear on my treads, so.
Yeah.
Did you want to do your budget?
Yep.
Cheats?
Yep. Okay, I'll do that. Can you see something that looks like a budget sheet? You can?
Yep.
Oh, great. Okay. So I'll just go over this fairly quickly. And if I didn't provide this to you, I can also do that as well, just so people can practice. But your tribe has sophisticated budgeting forms that they require all of their programs and departments to use when they develop budgets, because the tribe has to understand what their anticipated income is going to be over a year. So they almost everybody has an integrated program. So here we just have a budget form with 3 pages. One of them is showing a compilation over here on the far left. Then the middle one that says salary fringe worksheet actually shows how you develop what somebody's rates are. So if you have an archaeological technician, you can have an hourly rate of $15 an hour and you put them in for 500 hours. It calculates what the salary and the fringe will be. And that all goes down here. Can you see my cursor?
Yes.
Okay, good. That all ends up down here, but it also at the same time automatically transfers into the salary and fringe for the total budget. And if I click on this, you will see it is a formula. So for people who do Excel spreadsheets, they understand this. If you don't, it's like dark magic. It's like, I don't get how that works. And then the first time you go and change it, you erase the formula and you never get it back again. So that's why it's really important to work with somebody who knows how to do these. And as you populate these different fields, it adds them up. Let's say you need to pay your THPO fee, $200 or whatever. You want to hire a consultant to help you with your CRMP, that's $1,000. And all those things just keep adding and they're accumulating all the time we're talking down here, because again, there's a formula that shows that this cell that my cursor is in is summing, adding together everything in every cell from D71 to D71. Well, no, that's not what I was trying to show you. Oh, it's just taking it from here. I apologize. Okay, this one shows you that this cell right here is keeping a running tab for you of everything in all of these cells as you move through them. And then as you add people, you will see the salary and fringe change. So you put in, I don't know what you need. You need a historian, but you only need them for 20 hours for this one particular project you're working on, and they charge you $82.50 an hour, which you'll see it's going to convert. It puts all that in there, and it has now changed everything over there. And then you get down, and you have to have training. You're going to need $5,000 for training. You're going to need to have a car, and it's going to cost you $300 for fuel. And again, all those things are adding up down in this area. Our tribe has an indirect. I don't know what your tribes have, if you have an overhead line or a profit line, or if you all have indirect lines, but this is also calculating my indirect, which for the Colville tribes is only on salaries, but it is calculating it at our rate, which is 31.5%. Meanwhile, all of those things that I'm adding up here for the fuel and the training and the fees is on a third page of this budget, and it totals it up there so that you can tell what are your direct costs, which are all those things, versus your salaries and your fringe and your benefits. And there is a place up here to populate all that. I'm not going to go through that, but that's, so either you all understood exactly what I said, or some of you did, and you don't need to learn about Excel spreadsheets, or you're like, what is he talking about? In which case you will need help to learn how to do this, or preferably find somebody who knows how to do this, because the people who know how to do Excel spreadsheets and enjoy doing them, again, it's like watching water go over a waterfall. It just flows at them, and they just bang these things out. And they go, oh yeah, if you want to make a formula to move this number from there, to add it to this number here, to divide it by that number over there, all you got to do is this. And they just go bang, 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 and you don't even know what they did. So, and again, if you're going to get money, somebody needs to know how to do budgets. So.
I'm definitely in that second category guy that looks a little bit like sorcery to me.
I have an interesting question for you.
Yeah.
I know one of the things that we struggled with when I was at Grand Ronde was when we did our negotiations with the BIA for our 638 contracts, we would try to push up our indirect costs as a way to get additional funding. And sometimes that would affect us when we were applying for grants because our indirect would be too high and sometimes above what the grant allowances would be. Is the incorporation that you guys have done through the business wing of the tribe allowed you to kind of isolate away from that kind of effect?
Well, there isn't. So one of the things, and if, for anybody who doesn't know about 638 funding, learn. It's how the government, well, Eric, you probably can explain much better than I, but the tribe actually assumes governmental responsibilities and has the government pay them to do that. Our program doesn't get $638 because when I beat on the door of the people upstairs, I found out that for us to get $638 meant somebody got less $638, and that wasn't really benefiting the tribal needs at the time. So we just work off the contracts. But again, the indirect rates that we have far exceed some of the ones that have limits on them, but ours is only on salaries. So if the maximum indirect rate that you are allowed to present is 25%, and your
you mask
indirect
it by
rates,
driving up your other costs and keeping your salary down as much as possible.
right? And so that would lower it. The other thing is just really making sure you read what their explanation of an indirect rate is, and sometimes you just have to. Boy, I don't know if I want to say this out loud. It's important to know that an agency will never see your internal tribal budget. Maybe that's the clue I can give. Oh.
And good advice.
Yeah. Don't ever let them see that. Okay, I lost my full screen again. So I don't know if I answered that question or not, but that is a problem dealing with the indirect. And when you finally learn what it is we're talking about, if you don't already, then you will be where you need to be in terms of budgets.
It's a very meta way to talk about it.
So I guess I'll chime in to piggyback on what Guy said. All the operations that the Bureau of Indian Affairs used to do across Indian country, the BIA doesn't do anymore. And all of that, mostly as a result of the Indian Reorganization Act, has been picked up by contracts to self-administer. And so that means that compliance with things like NHPA is built into that 638 contract, but often is insufficient for the need of the community because it's getting separated out from a centralized staff to all these different communities all over. So the funding amounts effectively become smaller and smaller, and they're often not enough to meet the need that the communities have, like Guy was talking about. So you'll find that a 638 contract for forestry operations will include that the tribe will do all the NEPA and NHPA compliance, but there's not enough money to hire enough people to be able to hire a professional archaeologist full-time to help. And so finding other ways to fill those positions can sometimes be problematic for some communities. So that's kind of what we were talking about, how the 638 can affect those.
Thank you. And if you don't have questions on funding, like I said, the Confederated Tribes of Colville Reservation was one of the original group of 12 tribes in 1996 to initiate the 1992 amendments to the National Historic Preservation Act and become a THPO. And I have been associated with the tribe since 96. So if you have any questions about anything about budgeting and contracting and THPO stuff in general, if you have me for more time, I am open to any question whatsoever. And if I can't answer it, Eric can.
I appreciate your faith there, but I like to always say that if I don't know who to ask, I know who to direct you to.
Yeah.
So Guy, you sent me the template for this budget and your presentation. I'm gonna send those in a follow-up email to all registrants. Can I post these on the website? I'll probably post your presentation on the
Oh,
website.
you can't put me on the website. Not with that stuff.
Okay, okay.
Yeah. Again, I believe that there is a commitment that NATHPO has made to tribes and THPOs, and I do believe that the Colville Confederated Tribes have benefited greatly from the relationship over the years, and I view this as a giving back to the THPOs. So I would rather not have it on an open website.
Sure, sure.
Yeah, especially budget forms.
Yeah, no, I was just going to clarify, probably not the template, but the presentation. But we are recording and we'll have this available as well, and I can send it to registrants.
I'm trying to find the chat room to see if I have questions in there, but well, every time I have my screen, make my screen active, I lose every other function there is.
Oh, geez, sorry. Mostly people are just clamoring for your documents.
Okay. That's fine. If people don't have answers, I'm not going to force them to sit here for another half hour either. So.
Oh, I know people do have questions. I was going to ask more about the 638 thing myself, but you guys already touched on that and answered it. Let's see. So out of curiosity, of all the different types of grants that you mentioned, the languages and gosh, I can't remember what they all were at this point. Of those examples, do you have some of each category? You must, if you have as many as you said.
Do we have some of those? Yeah. So grants, of our 50 active contracts, we're doing maybe 3 grants and everything else is contract work or tribal dollars. And we actually operate an archaeological repository that has all the major archaeological collections along 300 miles of the Upper Columbia River. So we do a lot of work with the agencies storing the artifacts that they dug up from Indian land and making them pay for that storage. We have a museum and an interpretive center and share yet a second one. And we do seek a lot of grant funding for those because they they're not a part of our original mission, which was, so for instance, we have a traditional plant team, and that is something that we get a lot of small contracts to do with the traditional plant team. And they have built a local herbarium. And, you know, for people who live in more tightly compacted states or in urban areas, you know, finding a university to go do plant comparisons in and things might be relatively simple, but we are 100 miles from anything that even approaches a major city. So we just built our own herbarium and we sent tribal members out. And initially they were working with PhD botanists to teach them how to use all the scientific terminology and things like that, and to help establish the databases. But we haven't had one of those here in a couple of years now, and they do just fine on their own. And they go out and they do things like wildfire monitoring. After fires, we plot out these lands that have been ashened to see if anything grows back, and if they do grow back, are they beneficial traditional plants? How long does it take huckleberries to recover? How long does it take camas to recover? How long does it take bitterroot to recover? All that kind of stuff. And that's what they do. And that, again, is the type of information that you will find that the Forest Service is very interested in working with us on, and local conservation districts and things like that. Building the relationships and finding the funding is really largely a part of becoming one with the rest of the communities out there to see how you can benefit each other. And this is going to become a real problem for anybody who starts doing this much contracting work, is you have to be devilishly diligent in not just spilling tons of tribal confidential information out in casual talk. I mean, you really have to watch out for that, because it's way too easy to become quote unquote friends with people, you know, and go out and have a beer or have dinner or meet them to go fishing on the weekend or something like that. And all of a sudden you start talking about tribal politics, or you talk about sensitive sites and things like that, which with the Confederated Tribes of Colville Reservation is not something they are happy if you do. And in fact, in our employee policy manual, there are restrictions about sharing information, how much and what type. But people, it takes a while everybody to learn all the rules to everything.
Guy, we do have a question from Darren. Do you have a site sensitivity model? Yesterday, Eric touched on that a little bit. And in Nevada, the THPO has a Nevada Cultural Resource Information System as an annual subscription basis.
So is that like a predictive sensitivity model, or do you just mean has the tribe established where the sensitive areas for particular site types are? But I can answer both of those questions probably at the same time. We don't have one. We as an archaeological community in the Pacific Northwest have been very tied to the rivers, because that's where most of the apparent damage has been occurring for decades up here in the development of hydroelectric power and in navigation aids and river transport. And it was easy over those decades for the whole archaeological community to become duped into believing that the vast majority and concentration of archaeological sites were along the rivers. But as we have formed relationships with other groups, like the Nature Conservancy and stuff like that, we are finding the entire landscape is covered with sites, and not just lithic scatters, but lots of sensitive rock feature sites. And we have actually done multiple property district nomination set for the National Register, and have within the last few months put a dozen sites on the National Register using that model.
I would just say that I would always be cautious about predictive models. There's a tendency, from my perception, for them to become self-fulfilling prophecies, because they start to select site information that is kind of like easy. You know, oh, it's going to be on a flat area with a south-facing slope of less than 15 degrees. Ooh, that's where we build our houses today. I mean, in some cases, it can be really useful when they have the sensitivity models. But I would say that if you're going to do that, they're often super complex, and they're very much not just like a regional thing. They're like bioclimate. Because like Guy was saying, I know in the Willamette Valley, almost all of our sites are on the valley floor, and that's where you'll find archaeological sites. But the stuff that's in the high country is all like rock features or rock art, and leaves more of an ephemeral context most of the time. But if you aren't trained to recognize it, you can easily walk past it and think it was just a natural eco-factor feature, you know, like of the natural environment. So they can be useful, but don't rely on them. They can be a crutch.
Agreed. I have Tina Dolly's name up on my screen. Are you trying to ask a question, Tina?
Guess not. I don't want to put you on the spot, guys, so feel free to say so if this is what I'm doing. But if you have your plan at your fingertips, would you maybe want to share if there's like a table of contents, so we could see the kinds of things that are in it, since people don't seem to be bursting with questions?
You mean like share it on my screen?
Mm-hmm.
Sure. Let me see if I can do that.
And here's a question from Darren while we're doing that.
Okay.
Vandalized petriform at Sloan Canyon on BLM property. Do you have any thoughts on how to protect it in the future?
Have they done an ARPA investigation and identified who did the vandalism yet? Not yet. Yeah, I mean, one of the things when it comes to archaeological features, sometimes by identifying them and putting up protective measures, you can almost like highlight their destruction, because it will almost attract people to that location. Without seeing it and knowing the context that it's in, it's really hard to give recommendations. I've actually found that it's easier to protect sites by making them seen as ecologically sensitive areas, and encouraging ecologists to bury plants that have a tendency to be a little aggressive towards humans, like, I don't know, Devil's Club, or, you know, poison ivy or poison oak. You know, those kinds of things in an area, and noting it as ecologically sensitive will usually dissuade most people from getting in that area. And so I found that that's actually more sensitive than other places. In most cases, what I found is when sites have protective measures taken to protect them, unless they have a physical presence there, they end up getting hammered more directly as people look to jump fences and other things. And to plaque cacti, yeah, anything you could do ecologically to help protect the area, I think that always helps. Just plus it makes it harder for people to want to get to it, right? If it looks thorny.
The only thing I would add to that, if it's on BLM land, I do not know if BLM has their own enforcement branch. So if they don't, that makes it very difficult to try to manage that in the future. We have far better luck with state agencies. And for some reason, they always seem to have some cooperative agreement with the federal agencies. So for instance, out here, we get the Washington State Fish and Wildlife Enforcement arm to go on reclamation, at least reclamation lands. We've had great luck with them doing the ARPA investigations.
That's a good question about BLM. I don't know that. And if no one else does, I'll put it on my list to
I
ask.
think they do some of the largest level of investigations on ARPA and stuff. You know, I think they have some pretty good teams, and I know that there's some interagency teams. When this kind of stuff happens, you would normally see the police do the actual criminal investigation component of it, and then the archaeologists will work to identify the amount of damage and try to quantify it. Like if we were doing a study, this is how much it would cost us to do this study. And then all the consultation with the tribes can be wrapped in as fees as part of that damage assessment. And so if they're not doing that, that also reduces the amount of funding that they can get from those culprits and stops them from continuing their behavior in other places. So I really encourage them and you to push to get an ARPA investigation conducted on it and a damage assessment, as well as finding out who the violators were.
And one of our participants is messaging that BLM does have law enforcement in each state. And I know that they do a lot of stuff at the state office level. So you may contact someone at the state office level. I'm in communication with their acting FPO who's about to transition to another person again. So follow up with me, Darren, if you need contact information. It's Darren.
And do I have my table of contents up
Yes.
on the screen now?
I see it.
Yeah. So I'll go back, but I was just showing you that it goes on for a couple of pages. It looks like it's about 183 pages, and we did this 15 years ago. So, yeah. So I will send this to you when we close today, and you can share it with others.
I have a question. Does anybody else deal with state parks? Like here in California, state parks actually will declare an archaeology site, less significant, and they'll share the location on YouTube. And then a lot of people go out there and they take what's left, the artifacts that are left in the area.
Well, I'd be happy to throw a few lines in on that. So number one, just because an agency determines that a site is not eligible, that is not the end all in the world, and you should be ready as a THPO to go out and defend those sites, because the National Register criteria are not scientific, quote unquote, scientific value only. There's also broad associations with historic time periods and things like that. That's the number one criterion. And if you're a THPO, you should be able to find a way to tie any site type into a broad pattern of history, whether it's settlement because it's a village site, or subsistence because it's a hunting or gathering or fishing location. Even a lithic scatter, quote unquote lithic scatter, which people for so many years just poo-pooed and said they were just redundant sites and they had no value. Well, they do have value. They're the history of your people on the land. We were here We were here. We were here. This is how we know this is our land. This is what our elders tell us. This is what the legends relate. We were there. And just because it's just a lithic scatter, what does that tell you? I mean, maybe it's a root gathering area. So all you're going to find is people, you know, knocking a couple of rocks around to make a sharp edge so they could sharpen their digging stick. It's a value judgment to say that they're not eligible. So you should always challenge that. And then the next thing is associated with significant persons or something like that. And under Bulletin 38, those people can be real people or they can be legendary people. So you can say, well, the site is eligible because this site is associated with a creation story, or, you know, whoever, one of your local animal, well, is coyote here and raven in other places and things like that. It's like a coyote story or a raven story about, you know, the animal people before the Indian people came. You know, you can always defend it on that. And then with things like the rock images that we were discussing earlier, I think the third criterion is the work of a master. And you could say that any rock image clearly is the work of a master in the opinion of the tribe. And the same thing when you're talking about significant people, and I showed you on one of my maps all those allotments, we consider that all of those allotments have traditional significance. We're not saying each one's a National Register eligible traditional cultural place, but those people are significant in the tribe's history, and those areas, as we showed in the relationship, have some significance to the tribe, either as former village sites or resource concentration areas. So you should always be able to do that. And if they are putting that stuff out on YouTube, you should go to the State Historic Preservation Officer or whoever their governing body is, and just tell them that it is illegal to reveal the locations of these places. And if you don't stop it, well, there's going to be trouble. And I don't know, every tribe just defines trouble differently, but a lot of tribes will actually sue to protect those kinds of resources, or a lot of tribes will contact the appropriate upper level management of these places and point out the laws where it's against, you know, the regulations for them to reveal these things on YouTube and have people go out. And promoting looting is just the same as looting as far as I'm concerned. And I'm sorry you got me on a little tiny soapbox there. I'll step down.
Thank you. That was wonderful.
To piggyback on that, I would say that if you're writing to the State Historic Preservation Office, and I know that they're not, in California, they're not a good partner with tribes. But what I would say is that I would also write the advisory council and saying that the THPO, if they're not actively soliciting, if the tribe has been solicited for comment on this action, then they are by fiat not meeting their obligations under the National Historic Preservation Act. Because even if the agency makes that determination, they should be getting a concurrence from the THPO. And if they don't have that concurrence from the THPO and they went ahead and published the information, then they've had an adverse effect on the resource prior to the concurrence of it being ineligible. And so then effectively it's damage to an archaeological site, and then there should be state law that would kick in. So I would also write to the ACHP and ask for some, maybe say that you're having problems with the THPO not living up to its obligations of protecting indigenous archaeological heritage. I mean, you can be pointed in your language if you need to. That's one of the benefits that tribes have that agencies don't.
Thank you, Eric. I appreciate that. It's good information.
Yeah, that's a good point, Eric. And, you know, we are spoiled here at Colville, and I don't know about other Plateau and Pacific Northwest tribes, but we're spoiled here because we have a wonderful relation with the State Historic Preservation Office. and it was built. You know, instead of yelling at them all the time, we went and asked them, why in the name of goodness are you acting this way? And please explain to us your reasons, and then we'll explain to you why it is offensive and hurtful and illegal from our perspective and against our tribal ways. And it hopefully wouldn't take too many dialogues like that to establish a relationship. But ultimately, Eric's right. The advisory council has also always been very supportive of tribal interest, and it seems more so now than ever. So they're a good group to turn to for help.
Thank you, Guy.
Guy, you've been doing this for a good little while. Could you elaborate? We're out of time, but I'm going to keep going for a few minutes on maintaining those institutional relationships over time as there's staff turnover and administration change and things like that.
Well, again, that's one of the soapboxes. It's you know, it takes you 2 or 3 years to train a federal agency person to understand the tribal perspective, and then they go someplace else and they send in somebody new, and it is rarely is it somebody new who's coming in who has already been sensitized to tribal concerns elsewhere. I mean, it's not like in the Pacific Northwest we get reclamation staff transferring up here from Arizona that have already worked with the Southwestern tribes, you know, and have an appreciation for the tribal concerns, needs, perspectives, and rights. So, so that's how we deal with the turnover. We take a big breath, let out a deep sigh, and start from the beginning again. And it does get old after 40 years too, I'll tell you.
40 years?
40 years in the Pacific Northwest that I've been doing archaeology and been working in one area or another with the Colville Confederated Tribes for close to 30 of those. So, yeah.
You look
Child labor.
Doing it that long. I'm a baby THPO. It's like my 3rd year. I might have to reach out to you, ask you for some advice. The Forest Service, they were redoing their campsites up in Laguna Mountain, and they were decommissioning a site because we found cultural resources in the area, so we were gonna cap it, and for some reason they went and grabbed soil from another site to decommission the site. I can't believe they did that. Like, why would you take soil from another site that has potential for human remains and use that soil to bring to another site you're decommissioning? And I said to him, I did a site visit the other day, and I said, did you think about going to Lowe's and get soil from there? He's like, that's not a stupid question. Nobody told us to do that. I said, well, nobody told you to get soil from the other site over there. And a shell bead was found, so now,
that sounds like a potential ARPA violation, unintentional, but still an ARPA violation. And
right.
Again, they should be figuring out who authorized the activity. Even if it's found to be a miscommunication and no fault is assigned, they should still see what damage has been done. I always get frustrated when agencies do this, and it's fine to have mistakes happen, but you have to own up to them and own it. And if agencies refuse to do that, it shows, in my mind, an obfuscation of other things. And so that's what people try to think, start to assume that the agency's hiding and manipulating other things. because they're not willing to own the things that they blatantly have made mistakes with. And so I would say that you probably need to encourage them to do some training about what an ARPA violation is, have their archaeologists or district folks come down and train their staff on how to do that coordination internally, and then maybe offer to provide some cultural sensitivity training and have some elders come out and explain what like these places mean and how they connect to people. There's nothing more shocking to an agency person than seeing an elder have an emotional response about something to make it own on them. And in order for people to own responsibility, they have to feel the emotional response. And unfortunately, we're such a small part of the community of the country that people don't get to see our emotions. We're hidden away. And so I would say that you need to push the legal side and get the emotional side so that they can get committed. Because the reason that they're not emotionally committed is because they can't see us yet. And we need to make them see us, but do it with open eyes that are going to be willing to listen and see and hear everything that you guys have to share.
Okay. All right. I'm waiting for their final action report. And as soon as I get that, then we'll move forward with that. And they try to invite us over to start smoothing out the area. I said, we didn't even receive your report yet. So their process was going backwards, and
the SHPO should be involved in all this conversation as well. I mean, and any other tribes that have interest in the area, unless you guys are specifically requesting one-on-one consultation. It shouldn't be like the tribe and the agency making this. They had an adverse effect already. So now they need to own up to it to the SHPO and set it right and figure out what the next, what management techniques they can take to avoid this from happening in the future. And if I were you, I would call the state archaeologist and ask them to come up to the meeting and not even tell the agency and see if you can get them to show up and be like, hey, so now that you guys have had 2 adverse effects, you know, and never consulted with the SHPO, we would like to have a conversation with the SHPO here about how we can resolve this.
Okay, yeah. Okay, good. I'll do that. I will do that. And it is the whole nation. We have a committee. We have the KCRC committee. So the whole nation's involved.
Thanks for that, Eric. And it is now parking time in my neighborhood, so I'm going to put myself back on mute in short order. I would like to, we're somehow a few minutes over now, and thank everyone for staying. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap up here and be respectful of your time, and know that, Guy, can you put your contact information in the chat box, please? I will send a follow-up email to all workshop registrants and participants with all of the information that we have said we would share with you in writing. And you know how to get in touch with us as well here at NATHPO. And if you need other contact information, we can certainly connect you with folks who have participated in this. And with other folks who may have answers to your questions. Eric, can you put your contact info in the chat box as well?
Thank you, Valerie. This was a great, what do we do now that we're THPOs?
Okay, wonderful. Thanks for that feedback, Lisa. We appreciate it. We're glad you could join us. So we're going to go ahead and close with a prayer, and I just see names here and not all of them are known to me. So if any of you out there are elders for your tribe, I would kindly ask you to speak up so that you can close us with a prayer. And if there are none, then I'm going to turn it over to Eric and give folks a minute to respond here, and say thank you to all of our trainers. Thank you to the NATHPO team, as always. Thank you to the elder THPOs who joined to help us answer questions, to the baby THPOs and everybody in between. We so appreciate you and are grateful that you're a part of the family of THPOs and take time out of your incredibly busy days to come and participate in this community and look for additional programming from NATHPO in the future. And as always, please provide us any feedback, comments, questions, things that you would like to learn more about. That's what we're here for. If there's any elders out there, please unmute yourself and let us know. Hearing none, I'm going to turn it over to Eric.
Mamlachwa Sachalitai Piankari Shalish Telekom Pichech Pichu and Saga Tewala Hayumasi Kaba and Saka Duan Hayumasi Kaba Ikta Ya Duan Yetlin and Sa Gumducks Hayu Shalish Kaba and Saga Tewala Hayumasi Hayumasi. Just said thank you, creator, ancestors, grandmother, grandfather, for having us have this meeting and getting to share information and about the Indian way. And thank you.
That's wonderful. Thanks so much, Eric. We appreciate you. And thank you so much, Guy. This was incredibly informative. We will be in touch about additional programming using your expertise. Thank you, Madeline. And thank you to everyone. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon and evening. Stay safe, take care, and until next time.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.